Joins us on the show right now, the editor-in-chief of Officer.com, Mr. Frank Borelli. Frank, good evening to you, sir.
Good evening, Cam. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for coming on the program tonight.
My pleasure.
I don't know if you had a chance to tune into the show a little bit earlier, but we were talking a couple of minutes ago about the death of Sergeant Joe Bergeron, who is a Maplewood police sergeant in Minnesota who was killed over the weekend. The suspects in this case, as it turns out, two 21-year-olds. One was killed by a police officer when he attacked another officer. But both of these guys had long criminal records. And, in fact, one of these individuals, Frank, had committed 3 armed robberies in the span of 3 years and kept getting probation. Even when he violated his probation by committing another armed robbery and a prosecutor asked the judge to sentence him to 48 months behind bars, judge said no and gave him more probation. You know, these stories, we had another story about a Detroit officer killed yesterday or killed over the weekend. And again, his accused killer, a guy who should have been behind bars, kept getting probation time and time and time again. Is this something that police officers are concerned about, and are they becoming increasingly concerned?
Well, I don't know if it's increasingly. It's something that's always kind of haunted us. I mean, think about how, I don't want to say depressing, but how much angst you can feel when you go out, you do the job, you risk your life, you arrest these guys, you build good cases, you protect the evidentiary chain, you go to court, you give good testimony. The state's attorney does the best job they can. The defense attorney does their job, and we don't begrudge them that. And then the judge, and bear in mind as I say this, my father was a district court judge. And the judge makes a decision, and you're left standing there trying to pick your jaw up off the ground, going, what the heck did I go through all this time and trouble and effort for that? It's frustrating, and it is a concern. It's something that a lot of, the Fraternal Order of Police and other police unions try to deal with, but there's a limit to how much can be done.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that these tragedies do point out is that when you look at the type of individual who is likely to try to attack a law enforcement officer, oftentimes these are career criminals. These are guys who do have very lengthy records. And we know around the country that a lot of cities are dealing with a small number of core offenders who are committing a disproportionate number of crimes in their community. And so it was interesting. I saw this story out of Wilmington, North Carolina, where it looks like law enforcement officials are trying to deal with that by going after that core, subculture of violent criminals. What's your take on that?
I think targeted enforcement is always a very good thing. And in any given area, the police officers know who the largest problems are, and you're absolutely right. The article's right. The large amount of crimes are committed by a relatively small number of criminals. I mean, you might have a guy who's a criminal, he's a shoplifter, he stole a Lunchable at a 7-Eleven, and that's what he did in 5 years. And then you might have the guy who's doing 52 breaking and enterings in a week. And one of them is definitely the bigger problem. Mm-hmm. But they're known. The local law enforcement guys know them. They can target them. But a lot of times it boils down to what are the resources you have available? What are the labor hours that you have available? What other commitments do you have while you're on duty? Can you really dedicate your time to chasing one guy or two guys? It becomes very much a challenge for proactive policing, aggressive proactive policing, which quite often then you get a negative response to because you're seen as overzealous.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, I remember there was a case in Boston, Massachusetts a couple of years ago, and it's a tragic story. There was a young child named Laquarius Jefferson, I believe was his name, who picked up a gun that was in the home, accidentally shot and killed, or he was accidentally shot and killed, I guess, by his cousin who had picked up the gun. Turns out the gun was brought into the home illegally by Laquarius Jefferson's 15-year-old brother, who was a gang member. This family had been identified by social workers and law enforcement as being part of this violent subculture. Laquarius's dad was in prison. His mom was a convict. In fact, all of the fathers of her children were behind bars at one point for various crimes. And the state of Massachusetts, over, I think it was a 2-year period, ended up spending like $600,000 on this family. But one of the things that they never did when that 15-year-old started getting into trouble, they never took him out of the home. They never removed any of the kids, despite the fact that Mom and dads were violent criminals, and there was a lot of, I guess, social outreach, but not a lot of punishment when crimes were committed.
Well, that gets to be a challenge that you need the wisdom of Solomon to deal with, the wisdom of Job to deal with. I mean, you take a kid away from their family, and how do you justify that? Now, obviously, in that setting, that there was no decent values being taught in the home. You've got criminals raising kids, and then the kids end up neglected, and they turn to whatever they need to turn to try to survive on the streets. But I'll give you a different example. I was working in a community, and we had a couple of brothers, 14, 15, 16 years old, and we knew they were dealing drugs. And we knew that their mother was living off of the proceeds of the drugs that these kids were selling, so she wasn't going to take any action. But she rented a room to a young lady who was pregnant, and when the baby was born, that young lady became one of the best informants we ever had because she didn't want her child around that criminal element. It became a dangerous situation for her, though, because she actually had to risk her life to give us information so that we could prosecute these kids and the mom. The other downside of that is unless these people get charged, the children, that is the minors, the juvenile delinquents, unless they get charged as adults, once they hit 18, the records get closed, and it's like they've got a clean slate to start all over again with. And that's another huge challenge we deal with. You want to talk about putting repeat offenders back on the street. Take a guy who's been in the system for 4 years, give him a clean slate, put him back out there with a whole bunch of 18-year-olds that don't have a clue.
Right. No, absolutely. And when you talk about the woman who, again, put her life at risk, I mean, we're seeing this more and more, Frank. We've obviously been paying attention to what's going on in Chicago, Illinois, where gang violence continues unabated. You've got calls to bring out the National Guard. Mayor Daley's calling for more gun control and suing firearms manufacturers, which, by the way, might make it a lot more difficult for law enforcement officers to be able to get their sidearms if Mayor Daley had his way. And I even saw there was I think it was an anti-gang activist, somebody, I think it was with Peaceaholics in Chicago, who said that what needs to happen is that the communities right now that are being hit hard by gang violence, they don't trust law enforcement officers, and so what needs to happen is the police need to take off their vests, they need to take off their guns, and they need to go into these communities and start talking to people so that residents in these areas feel better about police.
Oh, yeah, because the group hug is going to stop all crime.
Look, the problem is not that I don't think, now, granted, I don't live in a high-crime neighborhood, but I've got to think that it's not so much that these residents are distrustful of police because they, wear a vest or sidearms. I think they're scared to death of these gang members. The snitches get stitches warnings that these gang members offer, and these people know. Look, if I go and I talk to the police department and I tell them about a drug dealer, well, that drug dealer may get picked up. He may get put behind bars, but his associates are still out on the street, and I'm going to be facing retribution.
Yeah, and it's not even just do I go to the police department, do I talk to the police department? It can be as little as if I even look at that police officer in a mildly friendly fashion, or if I'm courteous to them, or whatever. It's if I'm not giving them grief, then I've taken their side. And it really can be quite distressing. But we've talked about this before. The strength of our country and where we have to be able to fight back against crime starts with the average citizen. If the average citizen won't work with the police department, then the police are quite honestly, they're hamstrung. We depend on the citizens to be our eyes and ears. We can't be everywhere all the time.
Well, I mean, Times Square is a perfect example.
There you go.
This. I mean, with 82 cameras in Times Square, it was still a vendor who alerted a nearby cop and said, check out that suspicious vehicle.
Absolutely. And it takes a citizen paying attention who's willing to open their mouth and say something, and that's the key, the willing to open their mouth and say something part, and then the police can do what they're supposed to do. Again, the citizens have to work with us, and in these places that are gang-ridden, where the citizens are really beat down, it gets to be challenge isn't a big enough word. I mean, the police officers have to be proactive and try to be omniscient, and it just doesn't work. Right.
No, and then, again, taking this around full circle, for these law enforcement officers to know that, a lot of the time when they take these violent criminals off of the streets, they're going to be getting low bail. Maybe they'll be getting, the opportunity to get out within just a matter of hours or a matter of days. they're back out on the streets, and the witnesses that they need to put these guys behind bars for a long period of time are going to be running scared. It seems like there's this vicious cycle, Frank.
It is, but and here's where the cycle ends, and this is the really sad part to me. I know the large majority of police officers that I went through the academy with, that I worked with, they became cops because they wanted to make a difference in the world, because they actually cared about the places that they worked, and they wanted to fight or suppress crime. But 10, 15 years later, these guys come to work, and I'm not berating them. They come to work. They've been doing this job. They've been giving it their all. They've been sacrificing time with their family. They've missed kids' birthdays and wives' anniversaries, and they come to work, and they've reached a point where their paycheck doesn't change, no matter how hard they work or don't work. And they've had people telling them for so long, no matter what you do, I'm going to complain about it, whether you're aggressive, whether you're not, if I see you too much, if I don't see you enough, no matter what. And then these cops come to work and give them, try to give them a good reason why they should continue to be as 110% aggressive and gung-ho as they were when they were fresh out of the academy. They've been beaten down. It's hard to do this job for 20 years without appreciation. And there's guys and women out there that do it every day, day in and day out. And, speaking of that, Police Week starts on Mother's Day. For the love of goodness, if you're listening to this show and you see a police officer out there on the street, go up and shake his hand and say thank you for what you do. Show him some appreciation. Next week is National Police Week. We're supposed to be doing that.
Absolutely. Well, Frank, again, I'm glad you could join us on the program, sir, and let's have you back on the program next week, talk about Police Week.
That'll work, Cam. Thanks.
All right, Frank. Thanks so much. Have a good night.
You too.
Frank Borelli, the editor-in-chief of Officer.com, joining us here on Cam and Company.